Has anybody else noticed that the self-purported master of the art of the deal isn't actually very good at making deals? This is one of those things that's just kind of been noodling in my head for the past couple of days. It's one of those like aspy things where again, it's not simply that Trump is a businessman that bankrupts all of his companies or anything like that. But literally, one of Trump's true claims to fame is the concept of the art of the deal. He'll go in there and he'll negotiate with the other side, and you will come to an understanding. And then you look at it and you realize he's failed at the art of the deal with Putin. He failed with the art of the deal with the Democrats. He refuses to deal with the Democrats. He's failed with the art of the deal now with Iran. He just doesn't actually seem to understand how to, in fact, make deals. Like, has that hit you before? No, seriously. He might actually be really, really, really bad at making deals. He thinks making a deal is he walks in, puts an ultimatum on the table, and says, "You will sign this." And you're like, "Yeah, that's that's not actually how deals work, Bucko." Not actually how deals work. This might be why you drive your companies into bankruptcy. So yeah, it does appear that the peace negotiations between the United States and Iran have fallen apart because, again, Trump is shit at the art of the deal. And yeah, where is this gonna go? So I was just reading in the news feed today that apparently in Ireland, the police were called in to break up a fuel protest. So farmers with tractors and truck drivers with trucks, obviously, they moved their vehicles in to like blockade a fuel refinery in Ireland because the prices have gone up so much. So yeah, the police have already been called in to break up a gas protest in Ireland. All of the airlines are cutting back their services and their flights at this moment because they are literally running out of fuel. Southeast Asia is having a whole bunch of problems. Apparently, South Korea just signed an agreement with Kazakhstan in order for them to get enough oil. Here in the United States, gas is, above $4 a gallon, $4.16 average. And again, you got to think about that. That's average $4.16 a gallon. So that means in some places it's a lot more. Diesel is up at like $5.50 or something per gallon. And yeah, basically we are seeing the collapse of our economic system because our president is too stupid to quite understand what the fuck he's doing. The one thing that I've got to say for Biden, at least when a president is dead, you get why bad decisions are made. They're like, look, they're dead. What do you expect out of a dead president? No, this one is cracked out on his Diet Coke. He is very much alive, and he thinks he is winning. But so that's the thing. It's like, where is this going to go? We're 5 weeks, 6 weeks into this war that no American wanted. Netanyahu really wanted this shit. Negotiations have fallen apart. The funny part is, again, the weird part for me being an American is, again, Americans don't want this, right? This is not what Americans wanted. Whatever the disaster of Iraq was, or whatever the disaster of Afghanistan was, there was buy-in from the American public. Like, I was there, I was a full-fledged adult when Iraq and Afghanistan happened. Yes, you could say it was sold to us under nefarious pretenses. You could say our politicians lie. You could say a lot of things, but I will tell you, I mean, in that time period, Americans were basically behind those wars. Americans weren't behind this war. Americans didn't even know this fucking war was going to happen. Congress didn't know this war was going to happen. Nobody, in fact, other than Netanyahu and apparently Trump, knew that this war was going to happen. And I think that's going to start causing more and more problems here in the United States. And it's going to cause problems for the war because where is the civilian support for the war? Like, one of the things you have to think about with Iran, by hook or by crook, right? When Trump threatened to end Iranian civilization, his actual threat, right? You literally had Iranians standing on bridges and surrounding power plants Basically, so that if those bridges or power plants got blown up, that we would be blamed for the civilian casualties. Now, here's the thing. Again, by hook or by crook, every side does propaganda. I'm not trying to butter up Iran on that point. But here's the thing. They did stand there. They did stand there. Where on the other side, you got Americans, and we don't want to deal with $4 a gallon gas. You got to think about the dedication between the two sides, the two civilian sides in this war. One side is willing to stand on a bridge and get blown up just to cause us international shame. We don't want to spend $4 for a gallon of gas. There's a little bit of problem here, right? And you got that with Iran. You know, Iran doesn't want to be under the boot of Israel. Again, outside of propaganda. Who's right, who's wrong, not going to get into it. Look, Iran doesn't want to be under the boot of propaganda. If you listen to the Israeli opinion pieces, they are already talking about that if they need to be the hegemon state of the Middle East, oh lordy me, they will take on that responsibility if they have to. This is already being talked about in the opinion papers, right? And again, I've talked about this with the opinion papers in Israel. Is the opinions are where the future policy gets rolled out. And then everybody says, oh no, that's just opinion. That's just opinions. And then about a year later, it becomes reality. You know, I talked about this, a couple years ago with when they invaded Gaza, how the politicians were already, measuring for their drapes in the Gaza Strip. And oh, that's horrible. Oh, no, Eli. And yeah, now they're starting to build in the Gaza Strip because that's what they're actually doing, right? So again, you got to think about this from the Iranians' perspective, whether they like their regime, whether they dislike their regime. How does their regime compare to the Israeli hegemon, right? And the Israeli hegemon basically demands that their civilization stops. Because one of the problems for Israel is nobody wants them there. Right? They are the infected splinter in the asshole of the Middle East. Nobody wants them there. Syrians don't want them there. The Iraqis don't want them there. The Iranians don't want them there. The Egyptians don't want them there. Nobody fucking likes them. Nobody fucking wants them there. But here's the thing. They're only like 10 million people, right? The size of Israel is about this big, and they got about a 10 million person population. The fact of the matter is they could not go toe to toe with a comparative military or economic state, right? The reason that they've been doing so good is, strangely enough, that the Middle East has been in chaos for quite a few years. It's funny. These countries, they start to go down the route of democracy, they start improving their lives, their military becomes better, and then boom, something happens. So again, one of the things you gotta think about, think about this. If Iran, truly, let's actually do a mental exercise here. If Iran was actually a fully democratic country, 110% fully democratic country, and it was capitalistically successful and the whole 9 yards, and you have 90 million people there, do you believe a democratic Iran that is economically successful with a powerful military would still accept the existence of Israel? No. Again, and this is where I say to the Israelis, we have Illinois, right? A land with people that I do not give a shit about for people who are about to not have a land. Take Illinois. It's got a fucking water table. I'm telling you, this is the art of the deal. Look, where you're at, your great-great-great-grandkids will be still being led to the slaughter. Or you can go to Illinois, where there's something called a water table. But anyways, and so that's the thing. So the Iranians know that they will always be under the boot heel of Israel. So why should they ever surrender? They can't trust us, right? They can't trust us at all. Can't trust Israel. Can't trust anything. And so we're in this position where the fact of the matter is that Iran is in a much more powerful position than the United States is. The American citizens do not support this war, did not want this war. We don't even want to pay $4 a gallon for this war. And we have no idea what the fuck the point of the war is. Again, there's a lot of pundits out there now saying, oh, it's ridiculous. It's ridiculous when people say that Trump is a bootlick to Netanyahu. Trump does what Trump wants to do. They're like, okay, then what's the win here? What is the actual win for the United States? How does this make anything for the United States better? I know how it might make things better for a short period of time for Israel. I'm completely lost as far as the United States is concerned, right? So you have the American people, the American population doesn't support this war at all and does not see a benefit. Even if we quote unquote win, how does that make us any better off than we were 7 weeks ago? You know, it's like, what do we, right? You know, if Germany invades Alsace-Lorraine or France invades Alsace-Lorraine, I don't know, whoever the fuck owns it right now, I don't care, it's Europe. Anyways, right, they've got like the iron mine. I think it's got iron and coal in that area. So you're like, we invaded this area and we get iron and coal for our industry. You're like, okay, yay. Like if we win in Iran, what are we actually going to get? Is it just for oil? Is that? I don't know. Then you got the Iranian people, and they're going to fight for their survival. And so now we have the ceasefire talks. They're falling apart because they were never serious to begin with. I mean, look, come on. You don't send the clowns into a serious negotiation. The United States and Iran ended face-to-face talks on Sunday without an agreement, leaving a fragile 2-week ceasefire in doubt. The U.S. officials said the negotiations collapsed over what they described as Iran's refusal to commit to abandoning a path to a nuclear weapon, while Iranian officials blamed the U.S. for the breakdown of talks without specifying the sticking points. Neither side indicated what will happen after the 14-day ceasefire expires on the 22nd. Pakistani mediators urged all parties to maintain it. Both said their positions were clear and put the onus on the other side, underscoring how little the gap had narrowed through the talks. And this is the other thing to be thinking about too. Again, with Trump coming out and saying like, we won, we destroyed their military, all of that, you'll notice they're not acting like a power that lost. Remember when we won against the Taliban? Remember when we beat the ever-loving shit against the Taliban, and then the Taliban like just didn't stop fighting? I feel like that's what's going on, only with a country of 90 million people that actually are a little bit more pissed. Quote, we need to see an affirmative commitment they will not seek a nuclear weapon, and they will not seek the tools that would enable them to quickly achieve a nuclear weapon, Vice President J.D. Vance said after the 21-hour-long talks. Iran's parliament speaker, who led the Iran negotiations, said it was time for the United States to, quote, decide whether it can gain our trust or not. The deadlock and Vance's take it or leave it proposal, again, this is the whole art of the deal. You'll notice how much of the art of the deal is take it or leave it. That Iran end its nuclear program mirrored February's nuclear talks in Switzerland, though President Donald Trump has said the subsequent war was meant to compel Iran's leaders to abandon nuclear ambitions. Each side's positions appear unchanged in negotiations following 6 weeks of fighting. So that's where we're at. And so, again, as technology professionals, we have to be thinking about what this is going to do at a macro level for our architectures. Again, think about when return to office stops being feasible, right? I've talked about this, right? There's the whole work from home movement and the whole return to office movement. And again, everybody's a bunch of bitches as far as I'm concerned. But you do need to go to the office. you should go to the office. I'm not saying you need to collide all the time. Like this constant collision thing was a bit weird back in the day. But you do need to have some face-to-face, I would argue. But what becomes interesting with all these companies forcing return to office is what happens when their employees literally can't afford it. Again, you start talking about like $4.16 a gallon gas. That goes up to $5 a gallon gas. One of the fascinating things, I was listening to economists, and I've always heard the argument about $10 a gallon gas, right? $10 a gallon gas to the United States would destroy our economy. Okay, fair enough. But the funny part is, they're not complaining about $10 a gallon gas or $8 a gallon gas or even $6 a gallon gas. A lot of these economists are arguing $4 a gallon gas is actually going to do a lot of damage to our economy. And so this is something to be thinking about as you move forward. Again, like the art of the deal, like one of the problems we have in business nowadays is people don't understand how authority actually works, hierarchical positions actually work, is everybody has agency. Everybody has agency. Like even like worst case scenario, over in the Middle East a number of years ago, I mean, the tax collector comes and demands a bribe or whatever. You can literally light yourself on fire. I mean, don't do it, probably not, right? But you have agency. Like there's this idea that you have to do what the boss says. No, at the end of the day, if you want to light yourself on fire, you can do that too. Don't quit. But I think that's gonna be one of the interesting things is like, how many employees is it simply going to become untenable, right? This is not an argument about workers' rights. This is not an argument about, all the horse shit the blue hairs and the red hats have been arguing about for the past couple of years, DEI or whatever else. What happens when it's just fucking infeasible, right? Look, boss, we have our arguments about work from home to RTO. Those arguments are those arguments. The fact of the matter is I cannot afford to drive to work anymore. Let's think about this. If you are an hour away from work, so let's say you're 60 miles away from work. A lot of people drive interstates, right? If you get 30 miles to the gallon, Jesus fuck. I live in Asheville. I walk almost everywhere. Anyways, if you get 30 miles to the gallon and each way is 60 miles, right? That means you're burning 2 gallons of gas just to get to work. That means to get home throughout the day, it means you're burning 4 gallons of gas, which means in current market rates, you're spending $16 a day just in gas. Again, what is that? $16 a day, 50. That means you're spending $80 a week on gas, which means you're spending $320 a month just on gas. That's before you get to food prices going up and everything else going up. This is gonna be ugly. And so I'd be thinking about that. Like, as a technology decision maker, one of the things I would be thinking about is not just, again, the architecture and the systems and how those have to look. Again, do you use VPN or SaaS or whatever else? But also thinking about how you redesign the org charts in your company. How do you actually design the org charts for 2026 going forward? Outside of the buzzwords, outside of the mania, outside of whether it's DEI or wars in Iran or whatever else. If you were designing an org chart for 2026 and you're starting, does your org chart look like that? So anyways, some things to ponder, some things to think about. It's gonna get so much worse. Oh, sweet summer child thought 2020 was bad. Motherfucker, this is 2026. This is gonna get ugly. Put your thoughts down below. See y'all later.